Imagine waking up one morning and everything costs more. Not a little more, a lot more. Your commute, your groceries, the electricity keeping your home warm, the plastic in your phone case, the medicine in your cabinet. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't make a bad decision. You didn't overspend or undersave. But somewhere on the other side of the world, in a stretch of water you've probably never thought about, something shifted. And that shift reached through oceans and supply chains and governments and landed quietly, painfully in your wallet. That's not a hypothetical. That's happened before. And right now, the world is closer to it happening again than most people realize. This is the story of the Strait of Hormuz and why a strip of ocean barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point might be the most quietly powerful place on Earth. Here's what nobody tells you about global crises. They don't announce themselves. They don't send a warning. There's no dramatic music, no slow motion news alert. One day, you're living your normal life, and then slowly, almost invisibly, the cost of existing starts to climb, and you start to feel it in your chest, in your anxiety, in the quiet dread of opening your bank app. Most people blame themselves when that happens. They think, I should have planned better. I should have saved more. I should have been smarter. But what if the thing crushing you wasn't your fault at all? What if it started in a place you've never been, decided by forces you've never seen, over resources you barely think about? Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you changes how you see the world.
Let's start with a simple question. Where does your energy come from? Not your motivation, not your coffee, your actual energy. The fuel that heats your home, powers your city, fills your car, runs the factories that make the things you buy. For almost 20% of the world's oil, the answer is the same. It passes through a single narrow waterway between Iran and Oman, a bottleneck in the Persian Gulf called the Strait of Hormuz. Think about that. 1 in 5 barrels of oil on this planet has to squeeze through a gap barely wider than some cities. Saudi oil, Kuwaiti oil, Emirati oil, Iraqi oil, Qatari natural gas, all of it funneling through one maritime choke point every single day. Around 17 million barrels daily. Now, here's the psychological gut punch. We built the entire modern world on the assumption that this channel stays open. We built our cities, our supply chains, our grocery stores, our hospitals, our daily routines around that assumption. We never questioned it. We never even thought about it. And that is exactly what makes it so fragile.
There's a concept in psychology called the normalcy bias. It's our tendency to assume that because something has always worked a certain way, it will continue to work that way. We're wired to underestimate disruption. Our brains are comfort-seeking machines. They look at what happened yesterday and use it to predict tomorrow. But history doesn't care about our comfort, because the Strait of Hormuz has been threatened before, multiple times. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, tankers were attacked in what became known as the Tanker War. In 2019, several oil tankers were struck by mines in the Gulf of Oman. Tensions spiked. Oil prices jolted. The world held its breath. Each time, normalcy returned. And each time, our normalcy bias quietly filed it away as an exception. A blip, something that didn't really affect us. But here's what that bias costs us. Every time we dismiss the close call, we become less prepared for the moment it isn't one.
Pause for a second. Think about the last time something you completely relied on suddenly wasn't there. Your internet went out, your car broke down, a store was closed when you desperately needed it. Remember that specific sinking feeling, that low hum of panic when the thing you took for granted disappears? Now multiply that feeling by every city on Earth simultaneously. That's what a Hormuz blockade looks like. Let's talk about what actually happens if that strait closes. Within days, oil prices spike, not gradually, sharply, because markets don't wait for certainty. They react to fear. And when fear enters an oil market, it moves fast. When oil prices spike, everything else follows. Because oil isn't just fuel. It's the invisible ingredient in almost everything you touch. Plastics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, synthetic fabrics, rubber, packaging, the roads you drive on, the paint on your walls. Shipping costs explode, which means the cost of moving goods from anywhere to anywhere goes up, which means retailers raise prices, which means your groceries, your electronics, your clothing all quietly start costing more. Inflation appears. And not the slow creeping kind, the kind that outpaces wages, the kind that forces ordinary people into impossible choices. Heat your home or buy medicine, pay rent or fill your car. Governments start panic buying from their strategic reserves. Countries with less leverage, developing nations, island economies, import-dependent states start.
Here's the twist nobody prepares you for. The Strait of Hormuz has been leveraged as a threat for decades, not just as a military concern, but as a psychological weapon. When Iran feels economically pressured, sanctioned, isolated, it reminds the world it can close the strait. It doesn't have to close it. The threat alone is enough, because the threat alone is enough to rattle oil markets, reshape diplomatic decisions, and force world powers to recalibrate. Think about what that means. A country can move global financial markets, alter foreign policy, and inflict economic pain on nations thousands of miles away simply by saying two words: what if? What if we close it? That's how leverage works at the geopolitical level, and it mirrors something deeply human in all of us. The power isn't always in the action. Sometimes the power is entirely in the possibility. The threat of disruption is its own kind of disruption.
Here's where this gets personal. You might be thinking, okay, this is interesting geopolitics, but what does it have to do with me? Everything. Because every economic anxiety you've ever felt, every moment you've stressed about prices rising faster than your income, every time you fight financially squeezed for no clear reason, some portion of that stress has roots in systems exactly like this one. Invisible systems, global systems, systems that were never designed with you in mind, but that shape your life completely. And the most painful part isn't the economic impact, it's the helplessness. It's the feeling that something massive and incomprehensible is happening out there, and you're just absorbing the consequences. That's not weakness. That's what happens when individuals live inside systems too large to fully see, and it is profoundly, quietly exhausting.
But here's what I want you to sit with. Understanding changes something. Not everything. It doesn't fix the prices. It doesn't remove the anxiety, but it does something important. It shifts the blame from you to the system. And that shift, small as it sounds, is psychologically enormous. Because when you understand that a 21-mile waterway in the Middle East connects to the price of your electricity, you stop asking, what did I do wrong? And start asking, what is actually happening in the world? That question is the beginning of clarity. And clarity, even when it can't solve the problem, reduces the shame. It replaces the quiet self-blame with something more honest, something more accurate, something more human.
Here's what the world is quietly grappling with right now. The energy transition is real but incomplete. Renewables are growing, but the global economy still runs on oil. And as long as it does, the Strait of Hormuz remains a single point of failure for civilization's most critical resource. That's not fatalism. That's physics. That's supply chain reality. The countries that understand this are building alternatives, pipelines that bypass the strait, strategic reserves deep enough to absorb a shock, renewable infrastructure that reduces dependency. These are slow, expensive, unglamorous solutions. They don't make headlines, but they're the difference between a crisis and a catastrophe. And on a smaller scale, individuals who understand this are thinking differently too, about energy, about dependency, about resilience, not in a survivalist way, just in a more awake way.
There's a quiet realization that comes when you really understand something, like the Strait of Hormuz. You realize that your life, your stability, your sense of normalcy is woven into thousands of threads you can't see. And most of those threads have held for so long that you assumed they were permanent. They're not. But here's what that recognition quietly gives you. Gratitude. A strange, sober kind of gratitude for the ordinary days. For the days when the strait is open, the ships are moving, the shelves are stocked, and you can live your life without thinking about any of it. And awareness. A gentler awareness that the world is more fragile and more interconnected than we admit. That ordinary life is actually an extraordinary coordination. And that every person quietly absorbing the weight of that coordination deserves a little more grace, including you.
The Strait of Hormuz will probably stay open tomorrow, and the day after, and next year. But now you know it's there. Now you know what moves through it and why it matters. Now you know that the price you pay for the ordinary things in your life is connected to a conversation happening between governments and generals and oil markets in a part of the world most people couldn't find on a map. That knowledge doesn't make you powerless. It makes you awake. And in a world that runs on distraction, being awake is its own kind of strength.